before we get into the episode, let's talk about Fond Bone Broth's carnivore blend.
100%. Yeah, we've been huge fans of bone broth the last few months. It's really fueled our carnivore journey. Bone broth is incredibly nourishing, especially on a carnivore, animal-based, or just any type of diet, to be honest with you. And what's great about Fond is that they're a very simple, pure product. So their product is just boiled bones, water, salt, and most of their products have spices like turmeric, cayenne, cracked pepper, but they actually just came out with their carnivore broth, which is very simple, chicken bone broth, water, and salt too. So they're eliminating all their spices and just giving you something very pure that won't disrupt the gut.
Yeah, I think one of the things we talk about with the elimination diet is the fact that there's so many things that do actually affect how your body reacts to the food you put in your body. And the fact that they're just doing a pure bone broth with bones and just the minimal ingredients, I think is huge. And the carnivore audience will love this one. Fond does regenerative bone, so it's really high quality stuff. Go check it out. Use our promo code in the link below.
Yep, code MAFIA will get you 15% off your first order.
Alysa, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Pleasure to have you.
Happy to be here with you guys.
Oh, we're so pumped. We basically had a little pre-podcast rip that we could have mic'd up. And we were saying when we first met, I think the coolest part about this show is like just getting to have on people and brands that we love and have used. And we were saying a little bit about the Fond story is we first came across your product at the What Good Shall I Do conference in April. Yeah. And we were saying how with some of the bone broths, it's like they're good, they're nourishing, but some don't necessarily taste the best. And so the Force of Nature team had mentioned that they were carrying Fond at the conference and they had pictures of it that you could just go up and refill. And the first time we tried it, we were like, this is literally the best bone broth we've ever had. And I think we were drinking like 5 to 10 cups a day.
Yeah,
just pumped with collagen and glycine and all the good stuff.
Usually you're in the coffee line, but you were in the bone broth line.
I was in the bone broth line. So it's awesome though. And I know that there's such a great story, and this whole concept of bone broth is something that's very personal.
Yes.
And we have our own respective health journeys that have kind of led us down this path. So I think we'd love to just start off learning a little bit more about your health journey. You know, you're a mom too, and how that's led to the whole Fond story and creation. That'd be great.
Yeah. So I like to say Fond was born from lived experience. I am a mom of 5 boys, so I have the full basketball team. But the journey started, I was 5 months postpartum with my first kiddo, and I was dealing with emergency surgery. And, there's nothing like saying goodbye to your husband and your newborn child, just like praying to wake up. And when I did, the surgeon in the post-op was like, hey, you're going to have another procedure in 3 to 6 months. And I was 23 at the time, like, this is not going to be the trajectory of my life. And so that was a catalyst for me researching high and low about how I could heal my severe gut health issues. And I found that bone broth spans cultures and centuries, but it's missing from the modern diet. And so in 2015, we started Fond at the farmer's market, but the journey up to then was me really, I'm like the world's pickiest eater. Okay. Like the movie Ratatouille, the critic, like I totally resonate with that. And if it's not good, like I'm not going to eat it. And so I found this way of making bone broth really delicious and slow simmering it, the way it's supposed to be made, the way it's been made for centuries, but then also having kind of this lime twist of modern, mixology, right? Where I put like turmeric and cracked pepper and infused that into the bone broth, and then had it with some MCT oil to get the full benefit, a little bit of cracked pepper in there. And it transformed my health from the inside out. I never needed that second surgery. So it's been 10 years later.
Wow.
And after I went on a 5-week bone broth diet. And this is actually the hardest part for people to like get over, which I think is so funny. They're like, you drank bone broth for 5 weeks straight? Like, how did you do it? And what I started with was just clear bone broth, right? All day, every day for about a week. And then the second week, I started adding in some pureed vegetables, right? Like maybe a little bit of sweet potato, maybe. And then by the end, I was eating, full stews. And so really just allowing my body to lead this rebuilding process. And after 5 weeks, I felt better than I had felt in my entire life. And I was like, what?
It's incredible.
Look what just happened. And so, of course, when you have an experience like that, you share it. And so I was like, I joke that, if you had back pain, I was recommending bone broth. If your hair was falling out, I was recommending bone broth. Like if you were having trouble in your marriage, I was recommending bone broth, right? It was that whole perspective of this thing is so good. And I consistently heard two arguments for, it takes so long to make it. It smells up my house. I'm babysitting this pot. I don't even, and it doesn't even taste good. By the time I'm done, I don't even like it. I put these mason jars in the freezer and I'm like, I might use them if I get sick sometime. And so I really knew if I was going to get people to love bone broth, it had to be delicious. And so that's where, our Fond infusions came in and the whole tonic line. And I knew if there was variety, people could have a favorite. And it's true. People get upset if, their husband or significant other takes their jars of Fond. No, that's the flavor I like. And so I love that it's developed a little bit of a cult following with that too. But one of the things I noticed, which I'm excited to get into with you guys as well, is when you are starting from such a vulnerable place, you really notice the difference in the quality of your ingredients. And for me, I don't think I would have noticed the difference between conventionally raised chicken and pasture regenerative chicken, except I was so sick. And so in experiencing that difference firsthand and not having abdominal pain after eating one type of chicken and having it after eating the other, it led me to really think okay, what are the inputs that are going into this, right? And I'm very curious and I love to learn. And so I was like, okay, what would be making me react to something that a conventional chicken is eating? And some of the things that I found out is a lot of conventionally raised chickens, they don't sleep at night. So they're grown 24 hours a day under continuous light because it's all about how fast and how economical, right? And the ammonia levels that causes stress, right? For the animal, of course, how could it not? But then secondly, you have these ammonia levels that are just, at the level we can smell ammonia is 20 billion parts per billion, BPM. And that is already too much for the immune system of a chicken. And so if you're driving, there's this egg farm on I-35, and when we drive past it, I can smell the ammonia. So if I'm in my car smelling the ammonia, that's a really big problem. And so these chickens, their immune system is tanked, right? And so they have to get antibiotics or be euthanized. And this is all something that we're eating, right? I think for me, it just became very apparent that if I was going to create a business that I wanted to be supporting the right kind of ways to raise animals, but also the right inputs into our food. So it was the healthiest. I think what I love about the keto carnivore, and even aspects of the paleo movement is really that biohacking of okay, how can I tap into what's best for my body and how my body uses fuel and how it assimilates nutrients and not get in the way of that, but rather enable this beautifully elegant system. And a lot of that for me came down to the sourcing and the inputs for the meat and the vegetables that we were using. So,
wow, there's so much I want to unpack there.
Yeah, so much goodness.
So one of the, I think, common understandings in health is that you are what you eat, but you really hit on a key point, which is you are what the animal that you eat eats.
Yeah.
And I don't think a lot of people really appreciate that. I think most people tend to think a chicken is a chicken is a chicken, but there's another layer to it. And I think your story speaks to the power of that, where you were actually feeling the difference between the types of chicken or how they were raised. I think there's a really powerful message in that. And it speaks to this whole movement of the regenerative agriculture movement. So I'm curious how you kind of discovered the regenerative movement through this whole process.
Yeah, it's a great question. We've had some really great support early on. HEB, actually the buyer for my category, found us at the farmer's market and invited us to participate in Quest for Texas Best, which is, where they highlight Texas brands. And in that Quest for Texas Best video, we're talking about regenerative agriculture before it had a name.
Wow.
This is 2017. we're like, fresh into this journey, and we're trying to tell HEB like their sourcing matters. And that's why they should have Fond on shelves. And fast forward, we've had a beautiful and long-standing relationship with HEB, and I'm thankful for that. But it was something that was important to us from the beginning. And I think I always knew I wanted Fond to grow big. And if we were going to do that, we couldn't be part of something that was, in my mind, pillaging and plundering. We had to be part of contributing back to the land that gave us this beautiful product. Otherwise, we were contributing to a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that, I'm kind of like your modern day Lorax, right? But like, unless
I speak for the trees.
For real, like unless someone like you cares a whole lot, it's not going to get better. It's not. And I see myself in that of I'm just doing my small little part to just say, hey, this matters and how we do this matters. And one of the reasons that I care is, right, those 5 boys. I mean, the UN estimates we have like 55 harvests left. Like our soil is in such crisis that by 2050, they are in the US, the topsoil is depleting 5.6 tons per acre per year.
That's insane.
So we're not talking about like the sun going out someday.
Mm-hmm.
Like we're talking about an issue that we're facing, and like how can we not address it? And Fond is, my very crunchy, passionate mission to try to do what we can to reclaim topsoil, to support these farmers. One of the other like sad things is it's very hard. It's very hard to be a regenerative farmer. I mean, Will Harris talks about this a lot, but it's hard to do it this way. It's more economical in a lot of ways to not be a regenerative farmer. It's kind of a costly, like if he loses an entire flock, right? The government's not paying him for that. He has to completely shoulder that loss. And farmer debt is increasing like 4% a year. So what we are trying to do at Fond is to help, like you put all these inputs into raising this animal, right? And you butcher them and you process them. And because bone broth has grown as a movement, you can move some of these bones, right? Which is great. You can sell them directly. People make their own. I love that. But if you have to store truckloads of bones in a freezer, I mean, the economics of like, you're just adding costs to the life of, to the cost of raising that animal and then keeping that. And what's beautiful about Fond is we can buy those bones by the truckload and, increase the economic viability of raising the life of this animal. And our product is shelf stable.
Mm-hmm.
It does not expire. It has like a suggested, best buy of 2 years, and it starts to not taste as good in 5. But it's such a beautiful solution to this where we can use these now and it's nutrients that, you kind of have this bank of that you can pull from for a while.
That's so awesome to hear. And I think you had mentioned it was a 5-week journey that you kind of went on, incorporating a lot of bone broth, and you went from this path of like unhealth to feeling great. I'm just curious, what were you doing for a profession at that time, and what kind of led you to think, okay, like I'm actually going to bottle this and start selling it at the farmer's market? It's so interesting.
I know, it's so not like me. I really like to be safe. I don't like to take risks, and like, just guys, I was lugging coffee canisters full of bone broth down to the New Braunfels farmers market, like in 100-degree weather. Like if I can help one person, like this entire day has been worth it. And so I really do. I love people. I think the human body is incredible and amazing. And I think that we've, as a culture, spent a lot of money medicating symptoms. And when you do that and you're not listening, things spiral. Right? Before I had my surgery, I'd spent at least 3 months. It was probably more. I was going to the doctor, like, I don't feel well. Something's wrong. I don't feel well. Something's wrong. And they couldn't help me. They literally said to me, we have to wait to see what this develops into so we can help you. And I was like, no, I want to solve this before. And I couldn't, right? I couldn't solve it before it happened. I had to have that emergency surgery. And, obviously, it worked out the way it was supposed to because I started finding all these things. But I think, I felt like I had a key that other people could unlock something if they just had this key. And so I think it was a desire to help people. I think it was a desire to, when I bought my first like chicken feed and like chicken backs, it was like outside of the trunk of a car, like some farmer had like driven to meet me. And, you know,
it's like a sketchy drug deal.
It felt like this. And I was like, well, I want to go out I want to see your farm.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started going out to every farm we used that would allow me to come. And I just saw like, there's no more noble profession than growing food for someone.
Absolutely.
And I really wanted to support them. And to me, it was like the confluence of, okay, I could make a product that I believe everyone needs, like regardless of dietary lifestyle, this will benefit you.
Mm-hmm.
And we can support this type of farming that is so desperately needed and is being overlooked right now. So it's really cool to start that, you know, and we'll be 8 years, Fond will be 8 years old in July. And it feels like people are finally getting it, right? Like we've been telling this story for a while. We've been sharing the importance of supporting this way of farming. And it's like, finally people are like, oh, I'm interested in this. Like, what is this thing that you're doing? So.
Well, I feel like one of the powerful aspects of bone broth is that it does have a really powerful impact on the gut.
Mm-hmm.
And you were mentioning that that was the case for you. What is it about bone broth that is so nourishing? And like, I didn't even know that you could just do an exclusive bone broth diet. I mean, that's pretty remarkable. There aren't a whole lot of foods that you can say that for.
Yeah. I mean, so to get technical, bone broth is not a complete protein like an egg. And so it puts the body into like a good type of stress, right? It's not as extreme as like an autophagy, but it's similar, right? So you're giving the body some of what it needs. And so it's kind of mimicking this like fasting state. And for me, that was important during that period because I was burning off a lot of toxins. I was also like, digestion is inherently, it's stressful on the body, like it is. And so that's why fasting can be so wonderful. Is like, you're just giving your body a break from that process for a little bit. It takes a lot of energy to do that. And for me, what was happening is I had leaky gut syndrome. And so like food and toxins were passing like through my gut lining into the bloodstream. Right. And think about like heavy metals and toxins, and you don't have that protective barrier. Bone broth is rich in collagen, gelatin, but it also has glycine. And glycine is kind of this incredible, like not only is it the precursor for GABA, which is like the body's natural tranquilizer, but it also has like antimicrobial effects. So like a lot of people would deal with H. pylori or some of these things that are disrupting you absorbing the nutrients from the good food you're already eating. Glycine is kind of this amazing amino acid that wears a lot of hats. And so Fond specifically, but bone broth in general, if it's made the right way, should be very high in glycine. And ours is. And the other thing is glutamine. And, you know, if you think about like your joints and you think about just hair, teeth, skin, nails, you know, bone broth helps all of those things. People always ask me like, how do you have hair after 5 kids? And I'm like, yeah, I have quite a bit of hair. And it's the bone broth, right? That's just giving your body what it needs. It's great for teeth remineralization. It's good for joints, right? It's, you know, I think it's 25, they say, when the body stops producing its own collagen. So for you not to be having a regular source of that, and if you're eating a lot of meat, like you probably are good, right?
Yeah.
But if you're not eating a lot of meat, you definitely need to be supplementing, certainly with a bone broth and maybe even like a collagen supplement on top of that. So that's, you know, that, and part of it's like even the simple effects of like gravity and just the stress of like our bodies standing up against that force all the time and having to have energy to do that, having to have collagen structures that allow you to be able to withstand that, and then, you know, skin. So bone broth does a lot, but primarily the gut. And the connection I like to make is just as the soil is the foundation of health in our food, so the gut is the foundation of wellness in the body. And it's you know, for me, again, it's that the coming together of like, I can support these two things to this one product.
Yes.
And that's why I'm so passionate about bone broth specifically.
Let's take a minute to talk about some of the sponsors and brands who support the show.
What are you thinking?
I was thinking about Carnivore Bar. What are your thoughts on Carnivore Bar?
I mean, it's unbelievable. It's an unbelievable product. We were lucky enough to have the founder, Philip Meese, on the show a few months ago, and he was able to send us a bunch of product when we started the relationship and absolutely loved it. I mean, it's minimum ingredient product, beef, tallow, salt, and then they do have a honey flavored option as well. But it's so nice to have a bar that's like 3 to 4 ingredients. And like when you're following a carnivore diet, it's really tough to find products that are in line with that specific diet,
Yeah, for me, it kind of hits like the holy trinity of what you're looking for when you're looking for a food. So it's nutrient dense, it's convenient, and it tastes great. And as you said, most people who are trying to eat healthy, the convenience factor is kind of a tough part. So just being able to have something you can grab on the go, know that you're going to have that nutrition for the day, it's huge.
Yeah, and we were lucky enough, we got to actually see their factory too in Missouri, and they're just doing things the right way. I love how they offer an option for like carnivore purists where it's just beef, tallow, salt. And then they also have an animal-based option too. If you do want a little bit of sweetness, a little bit of variety, they have the honey in that option. And they're just people that are doing things the right way. They're very mission focused. They're carnivores themselves. And, we're always on the go. We're traveling. We've taken a bunch of flights together. To have a bar that has 30 grams of fat too, like that's huge from an energy density standpoint, right?
Yeah, he checks all the boxes, or the company checks all the boxes. And I just think the fact that they're sourcing from a regenerative farm as well, and Joyce Farms, just a win-win.
100%. The carnivore bar. So we got the affiliate link, and then it's code MAFIA for 10% off.
And then another one of our sponsors, one of our favorite farms, Holy Cow. What they're doing at Holy Cow is pretty remarkable. The relationships that they've built in the industry and how long they've been doing the grass-fed, grass-finished regenerative model is really innovative. They were one of the first people to be doing that and supplying whole foods early on. Just a great community farm, and also just product is something that speaks for itself.
Yeah, I think number one, to your point, Harry, they're just incredible people. We got to hear them speak at the Beef Initiative conference in Colorado. We had never met them before, but just hearing Warren's story where they were following a standard American diet, he had had a heart attack, and they were just looking for answers of like, how can we actually get healthier? Do I need to be dependent on medication? And they started changing their diets to incorporating more animal foods, and he completely reversed those symptoms of his stroke. And now they're just doing things the right way. They're grass finishing their beef. They're incorporating incredible practices. They have great relationships with the animals, and they're very passionate about just like connecting directly with the customer and also educating their customer on grass finished beef.
Yeah, and I think the best part is too, they're shipping nationally and trying to reach a bigger audience. So being able to not only supply beef nationally, but also educate people on the quality of good, clean, whole foods is just, it's an incredible mission.
How much do you love their beef bacon, by the way? I know that's your go-to.
Dude, it's one of the best things I've ever tasted.
It's that good.
No, honest to God, it's so good.
Holy cow.
Yeah. One of the other farms that supports us is Perennial Pastures, another regenerative farm out of San Diego. Our experience with Kevin Munoz, the owner, we had him on the show, a young first-generation rancher who's really empowered by this movement of regenerative agriculture and really wants to be a leader in the space. I think our conversation with him was so insightful, just in terms of how mission focused he is and how he really thinks about his farm as a business and wanting it to be here 50, 100 years down the road, even though he's just the first generation of it. And I think just being able to spend time with him out in San Diego was kind of the perfect indication of that, where we got to go have a meal with him at his house, hang out with his wife and kids. Like, what an amazing person. And I think his mission focus around raising really high quality beef and restoring nutrients to the soil is just one of those rare missions that I think everyone can get around.
Yeah, he has such a commitment to really feeding the local community in San Diego, in the San Diego County, first and foremost, but he's also passionate about feeding the community around the country. So I know they've invested a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of resources to being able to order beef in bulk on their website. So I know that they now offer quarter, half, whole cows directly off the website. They have that great ancestral blend ground beef product. So it actually has organ grinds mixed into the ground beef. So you're getting the benefits of like an ounce or so of organ meat, but because it's in the ground beef, you really can't taste it at all. And I think to your point, Harry, just another amazing person. Kev was someone that he was following a paleo diet in college and started realizing, wow, when I nourish my body with real foods, I feel amazing. Had a really successful stint in tech, but realized that there was just something else that he was passionate about. So he's one of those rare cases where, he put his money where his mouth is, and he's a first generation farmer, just, bootstrapping this thing, raising money, and just so passionate about feeding the community. Just an amazing guy.
Yeah, absolutely. What are your thoughts on organ supplements, and what do you think about the company that supports our podcast, Optimal Carnivore?
Such a good question, man. I think organ meat is something that's gained a ton of notoriety the last few years, and for good reason. I don't want to speak for you, but I think both of us have had a ton of benefits just incorporating organ meats into our diet. I would say that, we definitely prefer the raw source of organs, where we'll just, chop up some liver and some heart, and, there are different ways to prepare it. I think the raw source is the most nutrient dense, but we're fortunate that there are companies like Optimal Carnivore that exist that freeze dry organ capsules, so you can actually take them on the go. There are a ton of times where we're traveling where we're not going to have access to raw organs. So I can throw a little Ziploc bag together of Optimal Carnivore and be good to go. And I think 6 pills is an ounce of organs, which is like the daily recommended amount that will give you a lot of those really good quality vitamins in there. So that's kind of how I think we've been using it. Did I miss anything there?
No, I think the fact that it just makes organs accessible to people. And I think that organs are generally just a food group that are underutilized when it comes to eating nose to tail. And the nature's vitamin is a perfect name for these organ foods. And I think a lot of people are pretty, in the mainstream object to eating organ meats. But when you put it in a pill form doesn't taste bad, it's convenient, you can put it in your backpack, it makes things a lot easier. And I also think that just generally these brands Optimal Carnivore is focused on making people healthier, which is just such a strong mission. And, I think liver capsules is a great way to get people thinking about their health differently.
100%. There's probably someone that's listening to this right now, and you're interested in organ meats, but the taste might make you a bit squeamish. You feel strange about eating raw foods. Maybe you cook liver and you don't like it. Maybe it has a metallic taste. I think that's also where the organ capsules play such a great role, is that you're still getting that nutrient density, but you're getting it in a very convenient capsule-like format, and it just takes away any of that squeamishness that you might have to the taste. It's just a great product. And also Richard, who runs Optimal Carnivore, he's started listening to the show really early on, and he's built his own organ supply chain and is just doing things the right way and really trying to support the right people in the space. So just proud to be associated with them, honestly.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for listening. Now we're going to go back to the show.
Yeah, and that passion definitely comes through. And I just feel like we talk about this a lot. We just normalize things within our food system that really shouldn't be normalized. And, 28 years old, 29 years old, and we have so many friends. And I was textbook this as well, where we just normalize these gut issues, and people just accept the fact that they have like chronic gas or bloating, or I had ulcerative colitis. I have so many friends that probably have like undiagnosed IBS. And they just go to their doctor and they get a pill and they just try and suppress it. But it's like they're not getting like under the hood and addressing those root causes. So it's interesting. I always think it's interesting how it's like you have a red light moment with that first surgery, but it ends up turning into a green light because you're like able to actually get under the hood, figure out this very nourishing diet, start incorporating bone broth, and like naturally prove that the body is capable of being this amazing health, self-healing vehicle.
Yeah. Yeah. It's been interesting. I liken bone broth to printing paper. Like it's printer paper. Like your body needs it to do so many functions. It's like trying to use a printer without printer paper. Like it's that fundamental to so many processes in the body. And I think
the whole autophagy process just kind of blows me away, because I know I've used bone broth in the past as this tool to kind of hit like the reset button. And I know other people have used it in a similar way of just like restabilizing the gut. Yours was obviously way more serious, but I think there's such a powerful message there where it's like, hey, if you're struggling with any sort of gut issue, you can just use this tool that can like help kind of flush out some of the toxins.
Yeah, we actually have a dietitian made reset on our website that is like a 3-day reset. And it's amazing what happens when you take out inflammatory foods and you eat normal meals and you just incorporate bone broth, right?
Yeah.
So we're taking stuff out. We're still letting you eat 3 meals a day, right? But people's results with that have been really encouraging. And I think, one of the things that blows me away about the body's ability to hit the reset button, to your point, is our bodies are always trying to navigate the bad things that we're eating. And then if we're constantly medicating them, we're not making progress. And people always tell me like, oh, you have such a restricted diet. Like, how can you live? And I was at a Labor Day party and, I only ate the meat and like a little bit of the fruit. And then a half hour after everyone ate, it was like past the ibuprofen.
Yes.
Like every single person. Yeah, except my husband and I were taking and I was like, for a headache or for like a stomach pain or for like arthritis, you can have arthritis flare-ups. And I was just like, it's just not worth it. Like that way of living, it actually scares me to like not listen to the body. Right. And maybe it's because, like you said, I had that red light moment of like, okay, I've been in a place of crisis and I don't want to go back there. But the other thing that I love about bone broth is, its ability to help. I was diagnosed with Lyme disease about 4 years into starting Fond, and I was pregnant with my 4th son, and it was just, I was running this business that was like growing like crazy. And I wasn't eating, and I went keto, but like to a point where it was actually perpetuating a state of flight or fight for me.
Interesting.
So I started having these blackout panic attacks.
Wow.
From Lyme's disease?
Yes.
Wow.
So I had neurological Lyme disease, and the 2 things that came out of my DNA test for what would help me the most, glycine and glutamine. And I was like, bone broth again. Like, I can't make this up. And I was like, maybe I'm going through this experience so other people with Lyme disease can be helped. Because what's interesting with Lyme disease is the protocol is you start out on like a pretty rigorous antibiotic regimen. And I was like, I just think that would make me worse. Like there was just something instinctively where I was like, I don't think I can mess up my gut again. And I think that would spiral me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started treating it, of course, with a functional MD. It wasn't like I, was in the Wild West over here. And I used food and bone broth and like very targeted supplements and herbs and other therapies. And I've been in remission for 2 years.
Wow.
And so it's just crazy that it is so foundational. I was doing an Instagram live with Dr. Hyman, and someone was watching it and was like, I have IBS. Like, can I drink bone broth? And he's like, it's not can. It's like, you should. You should
Totally.
be. And so I wish that people just, and that's the hope, right? Is that Fond is so delicious that it's easy, right? Like we don't want you to have to think about it. We want you to just pop it open, warm it up, drink it any time of day, any time that you even have a craving for it versus having to thaw something from the freezer or, but I think the other thing that we've tried to do is give people quality without compromise. So there's no like lactic acids. I think there's other things. And then of course, excited to talk to you guys a little bit more about our carnivore.
Oh yeah.
Bone broth that just came out that it's just funny, like winding stories. I found that I was struggling with oxalates.
Wow.
And that's in a lot of things that I was eating.
Yeah.
Right. And so even having these cooked carrots in the base for the bone broth here, I find myself like, okay, I actually like can't have that, And we had so many customers reaching out to us like, can you just make a plain one? And sometimes they were AIP and they just, wanted something that was safe. Sometimes they were low FODMAP and didn't want to have to deal with, things that had just higher levels of fructans or things that they're not able to process. And so this was what I'm so excited about with this product is that it was really led by customer demand. Like the tonics, I thought of hey, this is a cool way I can get people to drink bone broth and love it. But this plain, just like salt and chicken bone and soon to come the beef and salt, right? That was led by customers just saying like, hey, I just want something that is like the Fond quality, but like totally plain. And so I'm excited to launch that.
Did you take a different approach to the formulation when it came to flavor? So it's like because I know you said you were very passionate about making it taste good, but this one's just plain. So
one of the things that we do that makes our process a little special, and I don't feel like I'm giving away the farm here, but we do use a certain amount of chicken wings in the brewing of our bone broth.
Interesting. Chicken wings.
Yes. And one of the reasons for that is the bone to meat ratio. We also use, of course, carcasses and really anything else that's sometimes drumsticks, right? They have a surplus of drumsticks. That's what I love about bone broth is you can really use a variety of things. Of course, the feed as well, because that's the most gelatin and collagen rich part of the chicken. But yeah, so we slow simmer it and just finish it. One of the things I think makes Fond taste incredibly different than others is that we're using an ancient mineral sea salt. So we use Redmond's real salt, and we've used them from the beginning. And I found that whether it was the electrolyte balance that was off or, that it tasted so good. And I believe that there's something, when something tastes good and it's in its natural state, I'm not talking about MSG or something that's artificial, but when it tastes good in its natural state, there's something that the body is able to do where it's yes, I can assimilate this. I can use this. Thank you. And we have a couple of customer reviews that, pretty consistently they'll say my body just knew what to do with it.
Yes.
My body just knew what to do with it. And I love that customer explanation of what's happening.
Yeah. It's going to be really exciting to just see how the carnivore line performs, because I had a little bit of a flare up this summer and I was just doing a lot of traveling and was stressed out. And I know for me with colitis, it's as soon as I start getting stressed out, it's that's when my stomach triggered the inflammation and everything. And I, you talk about intuitively knowing yourself. I know for me, when I'm having that issue, when I'm as close to just meat, salt, bone broth as possible, it's that's how I get my gut back to my baseline. And I was all right, I need to incorporate bone broth. But now so many of the bone broths are spiced and have different types of flavors.
Yes.
So to be able to have a broth where it's just the bones, salt, water, that's just amazing for so many people that are trying to clear up that inflammation.
Yeah, the goal is that it feels safe. Right? There's a woman who said for 16 years, she had not been able to drink something that didn't feel like daggers. And when she drank Fond, she felt like it was silk.
Wow.
And I was
can you write that down so we can put it on our website?
It's such a privilege though, to be able to help people in that way. Right. And to make it easier. I think, that those are the stories that keep us going. But yeah, I'm excited too to see how people respond. And I mean, I didn't even realize I was probably eating an avocado every day. And I love the fat, but just the level, I think we have to overcorrect sometimes, right? Or we have to correct an overcorrection of I was eating so much fat and doing so much of the heavy oxalates that now, my body is okay, we have to go in this other direction. But it's really just an opportunity for me to learn about that too.
Definitely.
And then I can now speak to customers who have oxalate issues. I totally know where you're coming from. And this is a safe one for you. So
yeah, you had mentioned around 2020 that you were going keto. And I'm curious because we've had a number of different women on the show. Yeah. And it seems like a lot of men do really well on carnivore and keto, and some women do too. But it's very contentious on should women be eating carbs or not. So I'm just curious, what your perspective is on that. What is your style of eating that makes you feel your best, especially having 5 boys and a husband too. Yeah,
I know. So, I mean, I will say this, I loved keto because I was thin and looked awesome and didn't work out at all. Right? I mean,
can't beat that.
There was something, and I had 4 kids. I mean, there was something about it where I was this is so awesome. But in the end, I wasn't able to deal with what it did for the constant state of fight or flight. And I think what was happening for me, and I know that this diet works for people, but for me, keto is best for a time and a season. And what I've observed with it is that there is a period of healing that can happen. And for me, I think that happened. I mean, I was eating only eggs and a little bit of, vegetables and really watching my carbs. And having coffee, and like I had this one coffee beverage that had like 16 grams of sugar, and I was like, that's it for the day. This is all I can have. But my husband did do really well with it. And I think there's something, it was probably not the right time for me to try it. I'm not sure, like with breastfeeding, which is a extremely high caloric intake, and then also dealing with the stress of the business. I just don't, like my parasympathetic just went into like overdrive. Like there was no balance. And so what ended up happening is I started incorporating a lot less, like I did a lot of meat still. Always I've done meat, but I stopped doing eggs because it was interesting. Eggs, milk, and eggs, dairy specifically, and gluten I wasn't having a rash. I was having like a neurological response to these foods. And again, working with my functional MD, having these DNA tests where it was like, you cannot have this right now.
Wow.
And so rather than resent that, I've always seen things as seasons. Like, okay, I'm not going to have eggs right now. And now I can have eggs, and I love having eggs. Probably have like an omelet every day and poached egg and mayonnaise. But that was just, maybe it's my personality, right? Like I tend to overdo things. Like I so uber commit where, I just overdid it because I was also doing like maca powder, like so many stimulants, and it made me feel good, right? It was like, I was so mentally sharp and I was so on it. And it was like I just completely wore out my adrenals. I completely wore out. So I think it was the keto diet. I think it was also 4 kids and running my own business at the time. And I just needed less, like probably stimulation. And then it all culminated in Lyme disease saying like, this is our moment, and that's what's tricky about Lyme is it really kind of, it's an opportunistic disease. It really kind of kicks you when you're down, and it's often triggered by an event. So, my Lyme disease was starting to really flare up like before I had my 4th son. And then, the postpartum, I think hormones have so much to do with it. And I respect Allie Miller a lot. She's talked a lot about how to do keto and to balance your hormones. For me, I've found that I do need a few more carbs. Like I eat a lot of fruit and I eat a lot of honey, low oxalate, but I do that. I don't do any sugar at all ever. And I can do fermented grains. So like sourdough, I'll make sourdough for the kids and I'll have a slice, but it's always about like not overdoing it. Yes. Or like I can't have a slice every day. I kind of have my like 1 or 2 slices a week. One of the things that Kelly Levesque, who's a nutritionist that I respect a lot, she was talking about the very thing you're talking about, how men seem to do great with intermittent fasting. But it's how women break the fast, and it may be that simple, but it's like this blood sugar craving that is like so intense that you're breaking it in the wrong way. And so like if you're breaking an intermittent fast, I'm not even talking prolonged, just intermittent fasting with like a bag of potato chips, your blood sugar levels go so high that it would have been better for you to just eat breakfast.
Wow.
Yeah.
It seems like you have this really intuitive approach to eating. And when I think about the food system, I think we've grown so far away from our food sources and, the people who are actually raising and putting all the time and energy into growing food. And I think that has a decent amount to do with just the idea of being able to regulate and understand like how these foods are actually impacting our body. How did you develop that? Like, it does sound like some of the health stuff was like a big part of that, but is there anything that you were doing in particular that helped you develop that intuition?
So I've always looked, even as a little girl, my favorite thing was to make analogies, like to find how these two seemingly unlike things were actually connected. And I've continued to do that. I'm also curious. I love to learn. So like, when you talk about our food systems, I don't know if you guys have heard about this Iowa food bill.
I haven't heard about it.
I don't think so.
So they are removing the ability to buy meat, fresh meat, from people who receive food stamps in Iowa. And it's also Yeah, I mean, that's a whole, you can really go in that. But, and it's also, fresh foods too. I mean, there's a lot of things like you can't buy white rice, but you can buy like brown rice. But I think one of the things that makes me so sad and like part of the work that I did, I used to volunteer with teenage moms and teach them with their WIC stipend. So they get a women and children, they get like a food stamp allowance, especially these teen moms. And I would go in the grocery store and I would teach them, okay, this is what you can buy with your food stamps. And this is how to meal plan. And this is how to get the most protein. And this is how, right? And like, these are the things to do where you can get the most for this. And I think one of the things I was surprised by is WIC did allow for a lot of protein, a lot of even canned chicken, right? Some good peanut butter. Like there were just some things where I was like, okay, this isn't just like Kellogg's cereal that's allowed on this. And I think what makes me sad is to see us continue to lean into like these manufactured and processed foods. And I don't know what's going to happen in Iowa. I don't live there. Like I really hope people stand up and, do what they need to do to say that they don't think their tax dollars should go to that. But I think what it represents a larger concern that I think you are raising, which is our disconnection to our food and our just almost arrogant assumption that like what we can create in a lab, what we can fortify is like better than something we can grow in the ground. Mm-hmm. And I think I just had a very visceral like, no, like I don't believe you.
Yeah.
And I'm so tired of like technology that I feel like has been, I mean, specifically in commercial farming, the use of synthetic fertilizers has like ravaged the land. And it has made food less costly, but it has really I'm talking about the soil crisis, right? It has cost our topsoil every year, 5.6 tons per acre. And I think I see these things together. I can't not see them. And I want just people to wake up and to do what they can and there's a very tangible way, by just buying differently, right? I mean, your dollars do so much. Mm-hmm. Even if you can't afford to buy all regenerative ground beef, then one of the 6 that you buy, right? Then one of the egg cartons. I think anything we can do to support this is hugely important. And then listening to your body and being curious. I think when we look at our bodies and our reactions to food, there can be shame.
Definitely.
I mean, judgment.
Totally.
Like, why can someone eat this and I can't? Why can, and I think what I would love to challenge someone to say is, okay, like my body is not reacting well to this right now. How can I figure out why? Mm-hmm. How can I lean into listening to my body and giving it the respect it deserves and also solving it?
Yes.
Like, we can solve this problem. We can do this. Mm. But I think it's that starting with, hey, let's like release the emotional baggage of like judging ourselves for not being able to eat avocado or whatever it is, and just kind of move on to the next step of being curious about why.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's such it's a sad reality. You'd mentioned earlier that you and your husband were at that barbecue and you're basically the only ones that aren't partaking in the ibuprofen. And it's a shame that like you guys being healthy is you're the 2 outliers there. Yeah. And I think when you've had your own experience, nourishing your body with the right foods and you feel how good you could feel and you have more energy for your sons and you're a better wife and you're building this great business, you're like, that's all an extension of you getting your health under control. And you just wish you could shake someone and make them realize like you can have this 100%. Amazing success too. But it's like they don't know how that feels. So you like hope that they can just get to the point to make that first step. And maybe the first step is just buying the 10-pound tub of ground beef from H-E-B. That's $2.7 a pound, but it's like still better than anything found in the inner aisle of the grocery store. And then you start to improve your health and you just start going from there.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't go to bed with aches and pains. Like I wake up and I have tons of energy. Like that shouldn't be a radical statement. Like I didn't have a ton of hair loss after postpartum. That happens to a lot of women where they feel like they lose half of their hair.
Wow.
And it's it's such an emotional time. It's such a hard time. And then like something that's so personal to a woman, her hair, to lose that. I mean, it's like devastating, right? And to think that, and then, you're seeing a rise in like fertility issues and to think like my first line of defense for everything is like, what can I eat to solve this? Like, what can I do? And I would but that option is available for everyone. And I think one of the things that is interesting is there's also maybe a little bit of entitlement in our American culture of like, if I see it, if I want it, I should be able to eat it.
Yes.
Right.
And there's a wisdom in like, maybe that's not good for me and maybe that's okay.
Yeah.
And even if it's just for a time, but I think allowing ourselves to have a little more balanced approach would do a lot of us good. And I know it's done me good. And, people ask us like, how do you do this? Like, how do you and Isaac do this? How do you have a business and have 5 children? And we tell them if we did not eat the way that we ate, we couldn't do it. There's no way. It's like, it's very, and I think part of it's moving your priorities too. Like our food budget is large.
Yeah.
But our medical budget is small. And we have 5 kids. So
one of my favorite moments of our podcast journey was speaking with Joel Salatin, and he talks about that point to a T. He was talking about how food costs have dropped, which is great on the surface, but then you have medical costs skyrocketing at the same time. So if you don't look at those two things through the same lens, you're really kind of like obfuscating the truth. Whereas like, yeah, you can really drop your budget for food, but like there's going to be side effects of that.
Yeah. I mean, the chronic disease management market is $4 billion right now. It's projected to grow to $14 billion by 2030.
Wow. 14 billion, you said?
Yeah.
That's insane.
It's tragic.
It's uncomfortable.
And do you know who's so excited to take advantage of that?
Yeah, there's people making money off
the pharmaceutical companies.
Yeah.
Right? So I think, just like you guys are doing here, the importance of how you eat and how that makes you feel, and just not being willing to eat differently than other people. And it's so important. It's so important.
Yeah. You touched on fertility before, and you said that we've said a few times that you have 5 boys. And I'm just curious. That's you're the fertility rates that are dropping. It's like it's a rarity to come across someone now that has 5 kids. So I'm just curious if you just have any tips for women, just how they should think about maybe approaching nutrition from a fertility perspective.
Yeah, we talk a lot about it's kind of a joke, but there is such a real thing as a keto baby.
What does that mean?
So it's,
Is he just jacked?
If you're struggling with fertility issues and you go keto, ovulation cycles. And again, I think keto is a great like temporary solution. I think it's it's a more intense reset button. I think it's really great and it has its place. And that has worked for not only several of my friends, but my own sister. Wow. Like every time, she was either struggling with fertility or she knew she was going to go on keto for a little bit to lose weight. She was like, okay, I need to know that like, I'm going to become more fertile and I'm going to, so we need to be careful if that's not what we want. There's another book called Awakening Fertility. And it's just connecting women with how they eat and how that affects ovulation and all these different, the women's reproductive system is very complex and beautiful and sophisticated, but we can't just think also that we can medicate it with birth control for decades and then decide to have a kid. Like no, like you've told this system to shut down and to not work. And then now you're saying like, here we go. Like there's just one of the things that I'm happy to see more literature coming out about is the correlation between birth control and breast cancer, because there are so many women that I know in their 30s now. We're not even talking about women in their 50s or 60s, 30-year-old women who are being diagnosed with breast cancer. So the first thing I would say is like, be very careful what you put in your body. That's medicine. That's also, pharmaceuticals, any sort of medication, and then what you put on your body. So one of the things that like, I love that there's all these tallow-based like beauty care products coming out. I'm like, so primally pure. It's amazing. Go buy their stuff. But, one of the things that's a huge endocrine disruptor for women, and I think for men too, but it just doesn't seem like it's as large of a scale, is the fragrance. So like what fragrance you're using, whether that's in the home or on the body, the shampoo you're using, the like Branch Basics, their whole entire line of like a toxic-free home, a toxin-free home. And, the things that you're using to wash your dishes or to wash your laundry in. And we don't think that's a big deal, but if it's up against the skin every day, which is like the body's largest organ, it is going to have an impact. So those are some of the things I point people to. And, of course, avoiding inflammatory foods. I mean, right away, your grains, dairy for a lot of people. We do drive out to the raw milk farm every 2 weeks and get our raw milk for these boys. We go to a farm in Schulenburg.
Oh.
So strict dairy. But so, I mean, if we do have dairy, it's raw. And then, but there are times when like I've had to be like, not for me for a little bit, and then it's interesting too, one of the things that came up in one of my DNA tests was a vaccine injury that caused an egg allergy. So I think you also have to be careful about looking at the whole body too, and just saying like, you could be having a reaction to different foods for reasons that are different than digestion, right? Different than maybe what, is the issue that appears on the surface. So
how do you think about getting your kids excited about learning about food and becoming part of the process? Because I don't have kids, but I think like cooking with your family, and I have memories of like cooking with my grandma that stick with me. And it's like, I think those are really important in terms of just learning more about what you're putting in your body.
Yeah. So, I mean, my boys, my oldest is 10, and we do allow soaked Weston A. Price pancakes on Saturday and with chocolate chips we do. And
treat yourself.
Little homemade whipped cream with raw.
And one of the things that was interesting is like I was making them by myself. I mean, it takes a long time. Like we'll do pancake eating contests because they're growing boys and they'll eat like 12 at a time. So this like takes like a 2-hour process, right? To make pancakes. And I just started saying, you flip them. So, supervision. But yeah, I mean, just these little steps of involving kids in the kitchen and like, oh, why are you soaking the flour? Well, because when you do that, it breaks down, it makes it more edible and your body's able to absorb it better. And it's, it's not going to have such a reaction to it. And with the boys specifically, we talk with them about body positives and body negatives. So just awakening in them that ability to listen to the body from a really young age. Like my son, my firstborn son, Ezra, had a really hard time with red dye. And he would actually like have these rage spells. So, we have this, we love our little 3-year-old that's like sucker punching people with rage because of this. It was terrible. It was hilarious and it was awful. And we just cut out red dye and he was a completely different kid. And it's interesting when so I have 5 boys and 2 of them have a really hard time with red dye and the other 3 don't. And so, I mean, it's not like it's the same for everyone, but I think teaching them, and Ezra will self-regulate. Like if he is offered like a red Gatorade or, something that he's like, oh no, thank you. Like I can't have that. And it was funny at school. He was refusing the desserts. I didn't realize like the teacher was giving them desserts. And he'd be like, oh, that's okay. Like I'm not supposed to have dessert every day. So I started saying like, if your teacher offers you a dessert, you will eat it because that like, please, like be respectful. And so his teacher said, Ezra ate dessert today. And he told me that you told me he had to.
Yeah.
I was like, okay. So, I mean, but we do try to teach them about the impacts of sugar. I think obesity and diabetes, especially in children, like almost reaching epidemic levels, and teaching them like, why don't we drink soda? We can have soda every once in a while, but like carbonation binds with calcium and like leaches it from the body. And just, so why? And they're like, wow, what happens to people who drink soda every day? And it's like, yeah, what does happen when you drink soda every day? So I think I'm really trying to bring them along, and answer their questions as they have them and get them involved in making bone broth rice. Like they can pour rice into a pot and pour the bone broth in, and I have really enjoyed that. But I will continue to do so too, because the oldest is only 10, so it's not like they're super helpful in the kitchen yet.
Well, it's really cool that they're able to actually like self-coach themselves at a young age. And it's exciting to think about where they'll be by the time that they're our age, just having decades of just eating these really nutrient-dense foods. And it makes you think about like, I think you had touched on it. I think 40% of our children are now overweight or obese, which is unbelievable. And I think 1 out of 10 children have fatty liver disease now. And it makes sense. You think about a lot of these kids where they're just eating Lunchables or goldfish crackers, and then they can't pay attention, and then they get on ADD medication, and then they're it's like the cycle where they're dependent on some drug to be able to be productive if they're not overweight or obese. It's not the most encouraging thing when you think about it from those terms.
Yeah, and I mean, we were just at, our boys play soccer every Saturday, and the amount of like candy that like siblings on the sidelines will be eating at like a 9:30 in the morning soccer game. And it's not like a judgment thing. It's not like I care about these kids and I care about their parents. And I think I just like, my body hurts a little bit of like, because the body has to work really hard to process that out. And I think if we made, I think one of the things that is helpful too is not always making desserts like the reward for things.
Totally.
Creating either family experiences or like our family does chores. Like our kids love making their own money and going to the store and buying stuff. And they're not allowed to buy candy with their chore money. We'd totally, give them candy on Christmas and stuff. I feel like we sound like, terrible parents, but we're not. Our kids love us. But I think, giving them this awareness too, and then hopefully other people say like, okay, well, I don't have to give candy to my kids either. Like I don't have to give a lollipop for potty training, or like, there's just these things where we kind of like reinforce from a young age, like sweets or sugar as like the response for hard coding behavior. And then is it any wonder why like when we get older, we're like, oh, I have to have something sweet after I eat, or I have to, or, oh, I've done something good. I did a good job at work. Like I'm going to go get a piece of cake or a cupcake from like, it's just, I think it's interesting to be somewhat critical of how we're hard coding like the need for sugar, because it's an addiction, right? It's an addiction, and they're not able to handle an addiction at this age. I mean, adults can't handle addictions. So
yeah.
Do you find other parents to be interested in how you view health and kind of like almost like the health nut in the group?
Yes. It's, I think I wish people understood I was coming from it from a place of love, honestly. I think that sometimes they feel judged just by knowing that I do things differently. And parenting is hard, right? I mean, you're making a million decisions for this life that's been entrusted to you, and you're just like really kind of hoping you don't screw it up, right? And I think I just wish that more of them just saw me as a resource. I do get quite a few like midnight texts, because I also am big into homeopathy and like have I think that's a very elegant way also of addressing health concerns that's widely used in Europe. And
what is that?
Homeopathy. Yeah. So it's the traditional medicine that we all experience in America is called allopathy. But previous to that, and it actually used to be allowed more widely to be practiced here in the US. Not that it's illegal, but it's just kind of been said by the FDA that it's like pseudoscience and not real. It's treating like with like. So it was discovered because, a scientist ate a plant and it gave him the symptoms of malaria. So when a patient had malaria, he like distilled this extract from this plant down and gave it to that patient, and their symptoms got better. So it's just the concept of treating like with like. So like when my kids, have a fever or hurt themselves, like I have my literal homeopathy first aid kit with me, and it's just another tool in the tool chest, just like herbs, just like food is. When they were dealing with asthma, they both had viral induced asthma as a complication from COVID.
Interesting.
And here I have my great like strapping young soccer players that are like having to play goalie for 3 seasons because they can't run.
Yeah.
And how we addressed that with B vitamins and magnesium and homeopathy and herbs. Like, I mean, we hit it with everything, and neither of them had to go on steroids. And I'm not saying that we didn't have this prescription at the ready in case we had to use it, but it was just really interesting, to think about approaching things from a more elegant and I would say like non-invasive way. To your specific question of, what do I think other parents feel about it? I hope they feel freedom.
Mm-hmm.
I've had a lot of parents say, like one of the things I told, my sister is about to have her first baby, and I said, I will never apologize to my children because I was afraid of someone else to make the right decision for them. And I think approaching it from that way, just being conscious of like, what are your inputs? What are your fears? What, are you able to be clear-headed and rational and logical about what you're doing? And one of the things I love about, a lot of other therapies are coming to light for treating chronic illnesses, not even in children, but like things like red light therapy and saunas and foot baths. And I think because chronic disease is rising, one of the nice things about it, and I would say a good byproduct, is a lot of alternative therapies are also coming up as people are just like, I don't want to be on 12 medications till I'm 80. I don't like the side effects that I'm dealing with. I think the dependency on them starts to become scary after a certain point.
Yeah. And I think that's encouraging too. I think the statistic now is 7 out of every 10 deaths are now from chronic disease. That number was like 1 in 10 in 1900. So it's like, it just shows you that clearly what we're doing is not working right now. But I think that it's almost gotten to this point of critical mass where it's like, if you just look around the room, it's like most people are unfortunately overweight, obese, sick, depressed, brain fog. And it's like, why do we just, we don't need to just accept this stuff. Like there's a better path forward. And I think a lot of people are waking up to it, and, decentralized medicine and these telemedicine practices are starting to open up more, which is probably like a positive byproduct of COVID.
Definitely.
Someone we talked about on our first call was Dr. Mary Kerr, who's she's out of Dallas. She would actually be great for you to connect with. Functional MD, board certified. And one of the first things that she recommends for her patients is like a 48 to 72 bone broth only fast to just like clear this metabolic rut that you've been in and be like, what if we just pull out all the sugar and the carbs and the crap and just nourish yourself with real food? And then let's start to build the base there. But like, let's just get you out of that metabolic hole for a couple of days.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I was struggling with my hypothalamus after you have to think like, there's been a lot of hormonal shifts for me. I can give my body a little bit of grace. But my hypothalamus was struggling a little bit after my fifth kiddo, who's so precious and totally worth it. But, just things you got to deal with, life. And one of the things that I read, and I've been working up to, okay, so I haven't done this, I've been working up to it, is a 3-day fast actually resets the hypothalamus.
Interesting. 3 days.
3 days.
Yeah.
So, and it has to do with the human growth hormone and like just how you can kind of tap into this. And so I've been slowly, because I didn't want to just like cold turkey do a 3-day, I didn't want to like pass out at HEB Sunday. But I am excited about doing it. I've been working up to it. And so I've done like a 36-hour, like, full day and a half.
Yeah.
But I'm working up to it, and I'm excited about like even just doing it that long. I felt like my body was burning off something, that wasn't supposed to be there. So I'm excited to do the full thing. I'll report back on,
part 2.
What it did. Yeah.
Part 2, perhaps.
How do you think about building up to that fast? Are you doing like 1 a week, 1 a month?
So I am doing it once a week, and I'm doing it like I do everything very intuitively. So I feel like I can tell when my body is like after 4 hours, after I skip that first meal, like I feel so freaking awesome. Like it feels amazing. And then and one of the things that's weird, and I found this in one of my keto groups that I was a part of, but actually making food and smelling it helped me. So continuing to cook for my family, like people are like, isn't that torture? And I was like, it actually helps me. Like I'm able to smell the food, I'm able to see it. And I'm like, I don't know, it was something where like not seeing food at all was harder. And then, there's a point at which I feel like I can feel my blood sugar kind of get to a place where it's like I'm having blood sugar spikes even though I'm fasting. And so then I'll break it with bone broth, right? And I think that's another thing bone broth is always the way that I break a fast no matter what. And I found that to be a really nice reentry where, I'm not reaching for the bag of potato chips or just like whatever I can have, or even like grapes. And I think the other thing that I always try to do, which there are people who are like so much more sophisticated in this, but I've always found it helps, is like if I have a little bit of like fructose, like whenever I have my fruit, I'm always having it with protein and fat. So I'm never just like, noshing on a couple of grapes or like half a banana and not having anything for the body to help balance with it too. So that's how I've been doing it. And yeah, I'm excited to do the full thing.
All roads lead to bone broth, essentially, right?
It's true.
Yeah. I know I'm kind of changing gears a little bit, but I meant to ask you this. I'm just curious, how do you think about like balancing your role of like being a badass mom and also running a badass business too? Because I'm sure people want to know the secret sauce.
Now we're getting to the real issues. I think like probably daily, and this is why I think having a supportive partner is so important. Like Isaac is really the yin to my yang, and he is like, I'm very high maintenance and very passionate and like always, but I also want to be like really safe. And so I don't always, would not have wanted to be the crunchy mama who people were like, oh, she's doing things differently. Like I would love to be the person who's I just have these convictions and I like can't do it. And so, we have started to do things like mom day. So there are times when mommy has to work and like I can't always pick the kids up from school.
Mm-hmm.
And that was hard for a little bit. Like that was hard for them. And I had one time when my oldest came up to me, he was like, hey, like, I just don't think the younger two are getting as much time with you as I got. And I was like, that's probably true, And we have a nanny and she's awesome. And I think part of me when I first got a nanny was like, I'm not good enough and I'm failing. And what happens when you start to do that is those are like very negative thought spirals, but it's also not true. Like our nanny is awesome and she is loving in our kids in a way that they are going to remember and cherish. And I want to encourage her in doing that. And also in the fact that like, I was not a mom who could just be a stay-at-home mom. I think there's a lot of nobility in that. I'm definitely not like putting that down or saying that's not something that should happen. But for me, that was not who I was. And I always, Fond was probably my like seventh idea. And Isaac was like, yeah, that's the one we're going to do.
Really?
Right? Because I'm a problem solver and I like to, I really want to help people. And he was like, this is the culmination of everything that you love, but is also who you are. And so I think the other thing too is I see Fond, like I'm doing it for them. I don't want our topsoil to erode to the point of where like my kids are in crisis in 30 years. Like I really do want the world to be a better place for them. I want the world to be a better place because I was here and I want them to see that, they can do things that are different, right? That they can find a problem that they want to solve and like dedicate their life to doing it. And like, if Fond is what I do with my life and like, this is my little corner of like, that's awesome. I'm glad I got to do that,
Absolutely.
And so I do, but yeah, it's a challenge. It's for sure a challenge. I think not punishing myself for needing help. I think not punishing myself for being a human that has limits. And when you're, there was a lot of grief for me in also the motherhood stage ending because 5 is great and I feel very good having 5 kids, but there was sadness and like, okay, this part of my life is done. And this, season of like little babies, as hard as they are, like I'm not going to have another little baby again. And so I think, and feeling like, man, did I give the best years of my life to Fond and not to the kids? Like there's always that tension. But I think, one of the things that you have to find is you have to find peace. You have to find peace with what you're doing and you have to find balance. And if you can't find that, then you fix it, right? So like what wasn't working, what's broken about it, how can we fix it? And for me, it was, okay, we're going to do a dedicated mom day. Like my husband's going to go out and enjoy coffee on Saturday morning and I'm going to make pancakes with the kids and he's going to have some alone time and I'm going to have like hands-on kid time. I think it's also made me more intentional with, there's so much wasted time in our day with media.
So much.
It's crazy.
It's insane.
Not podcasts though, just other media.
I do podcasts while I'm doing other things. So it's like, multitasking.
Absolutely.
It's like smart consumption. But like the amount of times that I think we saw we could reclaim from our kids being in front of Netflix or, even like their little, their online academies or just being with them. And I think whenever my sons ask me, hey, mommy, can you play with me? Like whatever I can do to play with them in that moment, like I drop it and I do it. And there have been times that I can't, but I think the great thing about owning your own business is that you do have that flexibility to say, okay, I'm going to reschedule this call. Or so I think a lot of it's about finding balance, about peace with, hey, I was going to always be a mom and I was always going to be a mom and my sons will benefit from that. I don't exactly know how, but I know that they will. And I think being okay that, and you have to do this in parenting anyway, but like our family isn't going to look like other families and we just have to make sure our family is healthy and doing what's best for us.
Your story is, and your story and stories like yours are exactly why I feel so optimistic about what's happening in the world of food. It's like people who are on a mission and have alignment with what they're doing in their business life and their personal life. It's like you can just tell that like you're so rooted in what you're doing. And so it's cool to hear you just tell that perspective of like balancing family, balancing the business. Like that alignment's pretty rare, and it's great to see that. And I know like we both feel your story. It's amazing.
Yeah. Did you are you familiar with Jesse Itzler?
No.
So he is he's like so he's married to Sarah Blakely that founded Spanx.
Yeah.
And so they're both like independent billionaires, which is insane. And they had kids a little bit later because I think they met later in life, and they're both in their like late 40s or early 50s maybe. And his motto is like, I'm never too busy to play for my kids, play with my kids. And that's kind of what you were reminding me of. Like that's like a mental model that you have, is it's like you're killing it at Fond and you're putting your heart and soul into that, but also as a mom too, it's like if one of your boys is asking you to do something, it's like you just instinctively know to just go spend time with them.
Yeah, this is important. And one of the things, it was really sweet in our all hands today. One of our employees called out that we have a very rare culture. We have a culture at Fond that he has not found anywhere else, and he's protective of it and he wants to preserve it. And I think there's so much about being a founder where I'm like, okay, I'm done. Like, bye guys, that's it. That's my cue. I've accomplished what I came here for. But it was so sweet. And I think a lot of that, in being a mom, I've learned so many skills about conflict resolution. I've learned skills about kind of maintaining the peace. And I've also, there's been a lot of very practical lessons in parenting that have worked. And not that, I necessarily parent my employees, but I think those interpersonal skills that you learn and get to use like with little tyrants are easier with adults usually. But yeah, so it's been interesting to see how I think that asset too of like giving our employees that space, right? If their dad is having a back surgery, if they're, we've had like some pretty crazy tragedies happen, and like, yes, go, like drop things and go. Like it's okay. We value you as a human, and like we'll be fine. Like we'll still be making bone broth tomorrow, so you can do that. And so I think that perspective. And we work hard, like don't get me wrong, we love what we do and but we also love our families and love having flexible schedules and know when it's time to say, hey guys, I gotta step out for a little bit.
How do you think about bringing people into the Fond team and just making that cohesion stay as great as it is?
So our most recent hire came to us, which was really interesting. That was like the first time that's ever happened.
Oh, why?
Proactively sought you out.
Yeah, and was just like, he was a designer and he was like, I love your look and feel and I love what I've heard about your company and I would really like to talk to you. And I didn't even know that we like needed his position. And all of a sudden I was like, oh yeah, like we really need you. And thank you for telling me that we needed you. And so that was, that was fun. But before then, and this is just hard. This is part of the story, guys. I hired a team. When was this? 2018. And they were with me for about a year in 2019. And they were great people, but they were not the right people. And our business was going through a transition from being refrigerated bone broth to shelf stable. And we didn't actually know we were going to become shelf stable yet. We had 3 major retailers tell us, this was June 19th, 2019. And they said, 3 major retailers were like, we will never sell a refrigerated bone broth. And we were like, okay, I think we might be done. Like, this is one of the only times we were like, okay, I think we might actually be done. And so on the 20th, we let all of our employees go. I will never forget it. And on the 21st, someone reached out to us who was like, hey, would you have any need for like a shelf stable bone broth? And I was like, yeah, we've been looking where you've been all my life.
Yeah.
And so then this new beautiful partnership began. But there was also like, I was not the leader I needed to be at that time. I think there's a lot about, I think when you're a female founder and CEO and you're in food, it is still very male heavy. Anytime I went to raise money, my chances are just lower of a yes, right? And so it's always more of an uphill battle. And I think there was a lot of imposter syndrome for me. Like, I think I'm faking it. I think I'm making it, but I'm like, I'm not sure. And, having to let that many people go at once and not knowing if my business would have a future was a very refining moment. And so anyone I added to the team, when we got on shelf at H-E-B with our beautiful shelf stable product, and then we got to a point where my husband was like, you can't do 7 jobs. like you actually do have to hire someone. And we had gotten this investment money. And so we had the money, but I had this emotional block of like, no, like I don't want to let anyone else go. And I found my COO during this time. So what I kind of did in the beginning was I would hire contractors. And if they worked out, I would ask them if they wanted to come on full time.
Oh, interesting.
And it kind of exercised that muscle of helping me to look for, okay, what are the qualities that I value? What's important? And sometimes the contractors went to be full time and sometimes they didn't. But the other thing too that I think has been really interesting is our COO came on. She was a personal connection. She was a Fond fan from day one, right? Helped us get on shelves at the job she was working at and just really loved the product. And so when she came on as my co-pilot, a lot of pieces like came together, right? Because you are good on your own, but I'm sure as you guys have experienced together, there's something different when you kind of find your professional person.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
totally.
Like it was and to this day, Fond would not be what it is today without her, even though we had so many years of building before she got there, right?
Mm-hmm.
We could not have, we have just, it's been like, boom, totally up and to the right. But she helped too with, she had a little more experience than me, a few more years professionally. She had a culinary degree and a design degree and was just, just this very interesting mind and great problem solver. And she took everything about the business that I wasn't good at, like the operations side. I can be the vision and the creative and the saleswoman and the businesswoman, but like dealing with purchase orders and inventory and like, man, that is where I go to die. So having someone who could take this on and do it better than me. And one of the things I realized is I need to hire people who are the champion at what they do. So like our demand planner, he is the best at what he does. Like our VP of finance, like he is so good at what he does. And it's awesome to watch him with these like Olympian Excel spreadsheet skills. And we're just like, go Steve, go.
Yeah.
And so I think we've really been the champion of each other's skill sets. We've been truly humbled and admired about what other people can do. And I think people want to work at a place that they can feel good about, that they can believe in. A lot of people who interviewed with us, even though it didn't work out, especially when we were looking for like our customer service position, they said over and over, I want to work at a place that I can believe in. Mm-hmm. I want to sell a product that I can believe in. I want, so from all different kinds of professional, like different jobs within the business, people do want to feel like the work that they're doing is making an impact and that they can. So I think that's also something Fond has just going for it is in our regenerative verification, in our mission to heal people in pastures, people can feel good about what they're showing up to do. But yeah, it took a long time. I mean, that was probably the hardest, one of the hardest things I've had to learn.
Yeah. I mean, customers can feel that heart and soul too. It's like you really can't fake that. It's just one of those things where you just intrinsically can tell if a company is really about those principles or they're not, and it comes through. How many employees did you have to let go back in 2019?
It was only 4, but at that time it was our entire team.
Yeah.
I mean, it was everyone besides Isaac and I.
Wow.
And I think, I still like, I did everything I could, I was a great reference. I mean, I think that's one of the things that's hard is when it's the wrong time and it's the wrong people, that's costly for people. And there's a weight there.
Yeah.
And, you want them to land in a right place. And so I think that's just one of those, sometimes your failures affect other people. Totally. And that is just part of life. And that's hard. That's a hard lesson.
Yeah. And I know, definitely. I know you mentioned that COO is kind of like, like the perfect compliment to you.
Yeah.
But is there anything that you can think of that you have done to just like overcome that imposter syndrome to get to that point where you're at now?
That is, you know what? It's so interesting. In the beginning of this year, at the beginning of this year, I was at the headquarters of one of our major retailers. And I was signing in through security. And before me, it was Coca-Cola, Nestle, Kraft, Fond.
Wow.
And I was like, this is awesome. But I was like, I also belong here. And it was the first time that I could really say that. I don't think I've told anyone this, but in September of 2022, we experienced a devastating fire and 2 warehouses burned to the ground.
Wow.
While we were raising money in the toughest economic climate in a decade. And I think making it through that season, we have a healthy business. We still haven't received an insurance payout because they can't determine a cause of the fire. We've had everything that we have done. My team has done it, right? Has worked their butts off to solve this problem, has stayed up late, has, because they love it, because they care about it, because this product, and like even retailers, H-E-B and Sprouts like worked with us. I can't even tell you how many times I was like, man, these guys are just going to cut us off shelves. And they didn't.
They didn't.
And it's like, what? In our distributor, like typically like the villains in the CPG industry is like your distributor. And they were like, they waived all of our fees for 6 months. So because they were like, we know you're going to have to short POs because you had a fire. And that was just incredible. I think, I'm a really good wartime general. And I think going through that showed me what I'm able to do and what my team is able to do in these hard times. And we didn't end up raising money. We didn't get a good valuation for the company that we were building. And a lot of people, sadly, like the saddest thing to me is they're not interested in regenerative. They're interested in fake meat. They literally believe that growing real meat in a lab or growing fake meat, despite like rapidly declining consumer demand, please. Like, let me just, I have a lot I could say about investors, but our Fond's investors are great. But so we had to figure it out. We had to rapidly pivot to profitability. We didn't have a choice. And so to go through that as a team, to not only go through like a devastating fire, but to go through like 50 no's of like pitching your heart and soul. We got more meetings than any other company our investment banker had ever worked with. But they just weren't interested in the regenerative opportunity.
Damn.
They were interested, right? Like that is so heartbreaking to me. And it's all about timing, right? One of the things that, and there, to be fair, like there was a lot about our business that because we were growing as fast as we possibly could, that needed to change. And this forced us to do that. But I think, our investor always said, which it sounds so cheesy, our lead investor, but it's true. The bend in the road is not the end of the road unless you fail to make the turn. And he said to me, he looked into my eyes and he said, I always knew you would make the turn. And to have a team that has confidence in me, I think the other thing that is, so I think there's a lot of proving to myself through this hardship and adversity that like, no, I can hang. Like,
hell yeah,
I can hang, and I can make sourdough bread and also, kick butt in the workplace. So,
where do you think you've seen the most growth personally through this whole journey of starting Fond?
So, I mean, it's the safety, right? Fond continues to shock me that I do wake up and do this every day because it's not safe, right? I think what I mean by that is like I'm taking, and coming on this podcast and sharing my story with you, like I'm taking a risk in making bone broth and sharing why maybe other bone broths that are on the shelf aren't up to my standards, right? Like that's a risk. I'm doing all these things constantly that are not safe. And I think I had to wake up one day and just be like, maybe life's not about being safe.
Totally.
And like,
it is.
That sounds so simple, but I think like we have this very instinctual, like even from being a little girl, like all I wanted was to feel safe.
Right.
And, maybe it took me starting Fond and having all these speed bumps to realize like, that's not the goal, right? That's not the goal. And so I've had to grow professionally there. And I think also, failure used to feel very scary. I think, if somehow we, like worst case scenario, like we lost Fond or something happened, like I could tell you I would still be proud I did it. I would still be so thankful for this journey and proud that I did it. And I couldn't say that a year ago. I think I was just in a different headspace where I was like, if I don't get like a $50 million valuation and like never have to work again in my life, then this wasn't worth it, right? Because it's been costly. I think that's the reality of running your own business and taking your time away from your children and fighting an uphill battle, convincing people it's worthy of being on shelves. And it's costly. It is. It's costly. And I think I just was in a different headspace of like, I deserve some sort of mega return on this investment. And I think where I've been able to come to is like, I could actually own this business forever.
Yes. And it's
like,
yours.
Not not ever have to have that like successful stamp. Like maybe only my husband and our lead investor and I know how successful it's been. Right. And we, or maybe our kids eventually help out with the business down the road. Like, would that be the worst thing ever? And I think I just had to completely reframe my association with this business and just my pride at what we've been able to do. And I think you have to be able to stare your worst fears in the face to kind of know what type of person you are, you know? I mean, and sometimes you run away and sometimes you're like, all right, let's go,
Yeah, it's so easy to like anchor yourself to the destination as opposed to focusing on who you actually become through that whole process. We've been thinking about that a lot with our show, and it's so, there's so many days where we're in flow and we're just creating and meeting new people like you, and we love what we do. And then there's also just sometimes you have those days where you're like, what the hell am I doing? I left this really safe job to go and do this, but it's like you did it because you're like chasing a dream. And even if the show didn't get any bigger than it is now, the network we've built, the people we've connected with, who we've grown to be as people, being able to speak and have these great conversations, it's like, what is that worth? And there's also this added layer of like, are you going to let some banker that thinks you should be making fake meat determine your true valuation? Like, what if they're just flat out wrong, which they are?
We'll see who gets the laugh last.
I know.
Yeah.
I don't worry. We got a couple articles that'll come out once we hit a certain milestone, and we'll be like, big mistake, huge. Just kidding. But I think we're at peace with what we're doing, and I think our team feels a lot of identity in controlling our own destiny, right? And and I really do. I have the vision, but the team is very much helps refine that and bring it to life. And it's very much all of us that are doing it. So it's been fun.
I have a question that's, I'm going to ask it for my sister because I envision her owning a business one day and running a business. What sort of advice would you give to other females out there who are thinking about making that leap and diving into the world of being an entrepreneur?
Yeah, I think don't be your own worst enemy. women are very hard on themselves. I'm very hard on myself. I think a lot of women limit their potential, just like I was before I was forced to see how tall I could stand, right? And in a lot of ways, I think women fall prone to lowering their expectations so they're not disappointed. But I think, I would just challenge a younger version of myself and other women to just say, don't do that. Don't do that. And you do deserve to be here. Your idea is good and you have the grit to see it through. I think, secondly, get a really good lawyer. It took me 2 lawyers to find a really good lawyer, and I love my legal team. There are so many issues you will navigate, from contracts to even with like suppliers and manufacturers to investors. And unfortunately, like the first lawyer I worked with, I don't use this word lightly because I have 5 boys, was misogynist. He would not acknowledge that I was the CEO and that my husband was not. He wrote incredibly preferential terms towards our investor. And I share that level of detail to say that we were like, okay, this is wrong. We have to find a new lawyer. We found a new lawyer, and he was sloppy. It was almost worse than the guy who was intentionally sabotaging me, but was sloppy. And so, I think I heard that when I was starting my own business, and I was like, oh, what a luxury, a good lawyer. And it's like, no, this is so imperative. It will help you structure your business the right way. They will help protect you, even from yourself. Sometimes, like, you might be willing to make a deal that your lawyers are like, I don't know about that, right? Like, are you sure? Do you understand the implications? Like, I think
they're spot checking you.
Yeah, so I think having a good legal team is invaluable. And then I think, this is very classic startup advice, but surrounding yourself with people who believe in you and believe in your product. The buyer who found us at the farmer's market in New Braunfels, we still email like every week.
So cool.
And he gave us feedback. He coached us along. And I think that's something that I thankfully had the wisdom to like lean into and be like, thank you. And what else would you say? Right. And I think people can tend to maybe react in a way that's like, no, I know what I'm doing. Or, oh, well, I don't want to ask too much of them. Like, people will tell you when they're tapped out. Most people want to share advice with people who are starting something. I know I do. Man, if I can help you skip a lesson that I learned the hard way, like, would love to do that. So yeah, those are my 3 things of just, don't limit your own potential, and get a really good lawyer and legal team, and don't start your business until you find one. And then thirdly, surrounding yourself with the people who believe in you and believe in your product. Because there are hard times, there are hard times and dark days. And those are not the only days that you live, but they are real. And so when you have people who, I love calling Tara my co-pilot, because obviously there's the metaphor of like, we're in the air, but she's also my foxhole buddy. There is no one else I would rather be with when literally it's burning down. And it's like, okay, what do we do?
Yeah. That's such an amazing feeling, I'm sure. But no, that's such good practical advice. And I feel like you've said it all, and we could continue to talk for probably 5 more hours if we wanted to, but obviously want to be respectful of your time. And this has it's been a special episode for us, just because we started off being fans of your product, and now I feel like we're actually friends and know each other really well, which is amazing. And just believe in your vision and think that you guys haven't even scratched the surface of what you're capable of. So just can't wait to see the Fond team and community grow, and just want to keep supporting you as much as we can. And just thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you guys. It was fun you asked me things I didn't even know,
Awesome.
And it's great to be able to learn that. So I appreciated being here.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alysa.